Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. Okay, on the show today, Dan Newby. So this is a man that I haven't seen for about 14 or 15 years, we just worked out. I originally met him as one of the senior trainers of Newfield, who are a really cool coach training organization. He's already shifted to work with emotions. He's written a whole book with emotions with Curtis Watkins, who some of you guys may have heard on the show. He's been a regular here. Also works with leaders, works with companies, but specifically around emotions and emotional literacy. So Dan, welcome.
Thank you. Great to see you again, Mark. It's been
nice to see you. I feel
a long time. Yeah.
Really fun. I love how, people stay connected in these kind of worlds. And yeah. Where are you in the world, Dan? Where are you right now?
I live in southern Spain these days. I've been here since 2012. I live near Marbella. And I love it. So this is home for me. Nice.
I'm in Mexico today. So
wow.
Both in the warm, avoiding the British lockdown. So let's hear a little bit about your journey, Dan. Like, where did you start? How did you get interested in coaching? And then the emotions. Let's just hear a little bit about where you come from.
Yeah. So my background is originally in education. I'm an elementary school teacher. But then when I graduated, there weren't jobs. So I worked in business for 20 years, being a leader, building teams, doing all kinds of things, just kind of intuitively because I didn't have any training. And in one of the positions I had, we had a coach who said, man, you guys, all you leaders should take this coach training course. It would really help you be better leaders. So that's how I got to Newfield in 1999. And for me, it was really life-changing. I mean, I thought I was pretty well educated. I thought I kind of knew how life worked. And then I went through this course and I realized how ignorant I was. And one of the areas in particular that really showed up for me as valuable was emotions. It was scary, it was difficult, it was foreign to me, but in the end, I realized that was probably my biggest area of learning, that and somatics. But for me, the emotional piece was just a huge attraction, and I saw how beneficial it was in my life. So I've been a coach. I went back to Newfield and trained coaches, like you said, and then I moved to Spain in 2012, and I worked independently since then. So more and more gravitating towards this area of emotions, emotional literacy, mainly because I came out of a place of emotional ignorance, and now I see it everywhere. I see how emotionally ignorant we are as human beings, and I realize, this is an area that would really benefit us to learn, and we can. It's just a matter of learning it, but most of us haven't.
Right. And Newfield has this lovely kind of holistic model of working with language. And I found myself teaching requests and offers to my new work team for my new company the other day. I was like, wow, this is useful 15 years later. And then obviously the somatic piece, that's how I was connected with Newfield, with Curtis on somatic teaching and work with that. And then the emotional side is a big part. It has this almost like South American flavor where the emotional side is a big part of the work. And as you say, we just aren't trained in that. I mean, occasionally now I hear in schools, they'll do like little circles of check-ins with feelings. So I think it's better for my niece than it was for me. But certainly of my generation and your generation, we just weren't trained in that as a thing to be literate.
No, I think, one of the things I do realize these days is how much, for instance, in my own learning, my own formal education, 95% of it was intellectual. It was, learning to read and write and language and logic and mathematics and physics, and a tiny piece of physical education, and maybe biology. So I understood reproduction, but really nothing else in terms of awareness or practices. And with emotions, maybe even less, because emotions were never addressed directly. And nobody ever showed us, there's actually a logic to emotions. They're not, random and capricious. They're predictable. There's quite a clear structure to them. We can learn them, we can distinguish them. We can use them as a tool. But, even my parents, who were a teacher and a minister and, loving parents, well-educated, they didn't teach me this because they didn't know it. It just wasn't available. So I think that it's a territory in which now, particularly since the emergence of the idea of emotional intelligence, is that it's really grown enormously in acceptance, and also people just seeing how being smart, being intelligent, being, well educated intellectually just isn't enough to create a good life or to resolve the challenges that we have as human beings.
Yeah, I think it's so common to go, okay, well, that guy's got an MBA, but he pisses everyone off. Or, she's read a lot of books, but she's a mess. She's not emotionally regulated. Or, that guy in IT, he's so disconnected from himself. Even in fairly corporate environments, this is a conversation now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And 15 years ago, when I was doing this work, I remember having team leaders say to me, no touchy-feely, no emotions. We don't want to go there. Don't want to talk about them. And I'd say, well, if we put them in the right context, we make it relevant and we show people how it's really important, then I think we have to, because we don't really have a choice. We're all emotional beings. So, we need to address it. And so we found ways to do that. But now actually I have leaders coming to me and saying, I did a 360. It says I'm emotionally ignorant. What do I do? Where do I start? How can I start learning this? Because I get it's going to make me a better leader.
So I kind of want to underline a couple of things you said there on like the why, right? Like one is we are having emotions, and in a way they're having us. They're, influencing our thinking, relationships, perception, ultimately performance, whether we acknowledge them or not. Mm-hmm. So any corporation that says we don't do emotions, it's like, no, you're just done to by emotions. It's like you're missing part of what's making you effective or not, let alone happy or not. Yeah. And then the other one is it just seriously, all the research is on this, right? It just seriously impacts your efficacy as a coach or a leader or whatever you do.
Yeah.
So there's a big why here for anyone, even if it's kind of difficult work.
Yeah. So, the thing about leave your emotions at the door when you go to work, actually, leaders say that or companies say that, but they don't mean that, because if you did that, you would leave ambition at the door, enthusiasm, loyalty, trust, all of those that are emotions. And they don't want you to get rid of those. They just don't want you to bring the ones that make them uncomfortable. Right. Or that cause conflict or challenge. But in fact, they don't really want you to leave your emotions at the door, because you couldn't function as a human being without them. So I think that's the first thing, is to say, well, some emotions make us uncomfortable to get our attention. Some emotions feel great to get our attention, but they all serve us in some way. Fear, anger, disappointment, they serve us in some way, even though they're not that comfortable. We don't really enjoy them most of the time, but still they have a purpose, they have a role, they're trying to communicate something to us. So we need to get past, one of the first things we need to get past is judging emotions, judging them as good or bad or positive or negative. Is, fear serves you, fear keeps you safe, and fear keeps you from doing things you really want to do. So is it a good emotion or a bad emotion? Well, it depends on the situation. Sometimes it serves you and sometimes it doesn't. So I think there's a whole range of kind of myths or traditional beliefs about emotions that we have to reframe what we think an emotion is, and then we can start learning, then we can start building a practice of that.
Okay, let's start there then. So you've said a few things like emotions serve us, emotions give us messages, emotions could lead to useful or non-useful behavior. Like if I'm scared, I might, stop me getting run over, but equally it could stop me, writing a new book and putting myself out there.
Absolutely.
So what is an emotion? Let's start right there. I
love this question. I love this question, because you would think, as much as we talk about emotions and as present as they are, we would all know. But actually, when I ask this question to a group or to a coachee, usually I get silence, or the response is, well, it's kind of like a feeling. Well, it's a pretty imprecise. Yeah. So for me, the way I think about them, because again, there's no universal definition that we can latch onto, is that if you stop and notice your energy, right, and you turn inside and you notice where your energy is and the sensations that you're having, that connected with what you're thinking at the moment is what I would say your emotion is. It has these three parts. One is an underlying narrative or a story, right? So when I think somebody has done me wrong, they've cheated me, well, then I'll feel anger. Why will I feel anger? Because anger, the emotion, is associated with that thought or that narrative.
There's an interaction with thought. If I think this person's a bad person,
Yeah.
going to create a different emotion if I think this person, I don't know, is just unlucky.
Yeah. Or forgetful or sick. Yeah. Or something. Yeah. Another thing is within our body, we feel an impulse to do something when we feel an emotion. So in anger, we want to punish the person. In tenderness, we want to hug the person. In compassion, we want to be with the person and listen to them. So every emotion has an impulse. And this is one of the things that we're taught as kids, don't always act on your impulses because they may not be. If you feel like laughing at a funeral, well, you may get in trouble with your parents because that's not appropriate behavior. But you don't have to necessarily do the thing, right? So if I just notice that, let's say I want to get even with somebody for something, if I just notice that sensation, like I want to write them an ugly email, well, that's telling me what emotion I'm in. So, for instance, I'm in resentment because they did something unfair, or maybe even vengeance, right? I want to get revenge for something. Yay. But if we notice these impulses, they begin to point us to what emotion is present. So then when we combine the two, right, what we're thinking and what our sensation is or our somatic experience, then suddenly we're getting an insight into all these different emotions that are unique in those two ways.
Right. I'm kind of a geek for this. I've thought about this a lot, Dan. So I was really looking forward to geeking out with you about this. And also how we understand emotions makes a radical difference to whether we say things like, well, you made me angry, or whether I can control an emotion. We have to have a really good model of what they are before we have some real practical consequences. And my sort of general model is, okay, this sensation in the body, which some people call feeling, there's some people call emotions feeling, and then gestalts of feelings have a physical level, and in mindfulness they call it the first and second foundations of mindfulness, that also has a qualitative yum or yuck level, which is sort of emergent from the physical, because you can be whipped and like it, or you can be whipped and don't like it. There's the sensation of being whipped, and then there's the sort of emergent sense of, is that enjoyable or not, which is that's actually two things that are in the word feeling in English. And they exist as gestalts, which interact with the body bidirectionally. So anger makes us tense, but tension makes us angry. And also with thinking bidirectionally. So when there's anger, I think angry thoughts. I'm more likely to be like, fuck him, because I'm angry, even though it's just because I'm hungry. But equally, the more I think fuck him, the angrier I get. And then there's also this behavioral, and this I think is critical, and I got from Newfield, is a behavioral predisposition. So it's not just that I'm feeling anger, it's not just that I'm thinking anger, I'm more likely to punish. It's leaning me in that direction rather than to forgive. I mean, that's my model of emotions. Is that pretty aligned? It's taken me about 20 years to work that out. Is that pretty aligned with yours?
Yeah, it's beautiful. And here's the thing, Mark, is that, there is no, what would we say? There is no chart we can go to that we all agree on. This is how it is. But I think that for coaches or for leaders, anyone who wants to learn this, we need to get really clear for ourselves. How does it make sense to us? And based not just on things we read, but on our own experience. So what you reflected, some of the ways you articulate probably came from, teachers or reading or other things. But your understanding of it is really something you developed. It came to you based on your work with it and noticing what happened to you. And I think that this is really important for people, because learning in emotions is very different than learning mathematics, right? In mathematics, here's the way you do it. Now, there might be a variation here. You might be able to do it a little bit differently, but there's pretty much a set way you do things. And I think when we're working with emotions, there's so much that's unknown and there's so much that's experiential that we can't even put into words, to tell you the truth. So we need to get clear, how does it work for us, so that then we can be curious with our coachee, how is it working for them? So I agree with everything you said. I could never put it in those words because I don't know those words, right? They're not my words. So I think each of us needs to develop our understanding, develop our articulation, and know how to share that with people.
In the shared articulation, well, like part of the beginning of this conversation is just me and you going, okay, what are we talking about? And it's the same thing. Like when someone uses the word feeling, is that the same as what I mean? Or even within a particular emotion, they're like, I don't do anger. I'm like, oh, you mean you don't do what I call hate? And Like there's the same word anger could be a very different physical and predispositional set of things. But just because we have a shared word doesn't mean it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pass this out a little bit more. You said emotions have a logic, and this is what in the book you really break down. Like, I've never seen such detail. It's beautiful. Like, you talk about the logic of emotions, like they're not just random. Some people think of emotions as like the weather, it comes and goes. So what's your sense of this what you call the logic of emotions?
Well, I think one of the real confusing things is we've confused reason and logic. And so for me, it is true that emotions are irrational, meaning they're not just of the mind, right? They're taking place in the body. There's other parts to them. But it doesn't mean they're illogical in my world, because logic means there's a process. There's a way that I can construct something, I can predict something, I can have a model for it. And I would say that emotions are very logical. Again, we get into this point about there is no universal interpretation even of what is an emotion or what makes something an emotion. What are the criteria for something to be an emotion? Well, if you go Google lists of emotions, you'll get 50 different lists. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells me that there is no universal agreement on how we decide what is an emotion. So the way we do it in the book is we talk about there's 3 components. If you can meet these criteria, then we're going to call you an emotion. It's our interpretation, right? It's not everybody's, but they are this underlying narrative. The underlying narrative of sadness is we've lost something we care about. Always. It's completely predictable. And if somebody loses something they care about, they'll feel sad. The second thing is
sad. Just jump in there. We can actually be curious, say, as a coach, like, hey, what has this person lost?
Yeah, absolutely.
If they're not aware of that, that's
absolutely
pretty good inquiry.
Right? Absolutely.
That's the first part. Second part.
The second part would be the impulse, right? So what do we feel like doing, whether we do it or not? Because that tells us an enormous amount about the emotion. And some emotions have a very similar narrative. We think something quite similar, but the impulse is different. Yeah?
Give me an example of that.
Well, an example of that would be, I'll have to think about it, but I can do it the other way, is quite simple, is that if we think about serving people, okay, that's an impulse. I want to take care of people, I want to serve them. Well, that could actually come out of many different emotions, right? It could come out of care, compassion, urgency, right? There's a whole bunch of emotions that might move me in that way. So by having these 2 criteria, what's happening here in the narrative, what's happening here with the impulse, again, it's like a funnel. It narrows it down to, it could only be one of these 3 or 4 emotions. Now, we won't know that until we ask the coachee. We want to hear more. We want to say, well, here's the emotions it sounds like it might be, right? Is it one of these emotions? And then you can help them get to what I would call the root emotion. Like, what's the biggest emotion that's producing this challenge for you? Yeah, because for instance, they might say, well, they're challenged by something, because they're afraid of it. Okay, well, maybe. Okay, so maybe it's fear. But if I listen to them, I might also hear embarrassment, right? They're embarrassed that they might fail. So it's a kind of fear, you might say, but there's an embarrassment. Or it might be guilt. They don't think they should do that. So by listening to the story and hearing what their impulse is, we can narrow it down to what's the emotion that's driving them, or that's really the barrier to keep them from doing what they want to do.
So sometimes there's these primary and secondary emotions, they're sometimes called, right? Like, I'm angry, but underneath that is shame or fear.
It can be. And what I say is we have emotions about our emotions. So exactly, is that many people believe, for instance, lust. I think of lust as an emotion, but not everybody's comfortable admitting that they feel that. So they may feel shame or embarrassment. So instead of saying, I feel lust, what do they say? Well, they get caught by the shame or the embarrassment. So when you go to coach them, what are they going to bring? Well, they're going to talk about shame and embarrassment, right? But underneath of that, right, is this other emotion that they don't want to share. They don't want to acknowledge. They don't want to admit they have it, but that's the emotion that's driving them. Yep.
Okay, to recap, did we do the 3 parts there? Could you say them again?
No. The third part is, it's not something you see, but it's something that's important to decide, which is that every emotion has a purpose. And I think this is hugely important. What is the purpose of sadness? It's to tell us what we care about, right? Because I can be sad because my dog ran away and I love my dog, right? But if I just think about my wife dying, I'll feel sad. Okay. It hasn't happened. I might die first. So it's completely hypothetical.
Yeah.
But what does it tell me that I feel sad? That I care about her.
Yes.
So the purpose of sadness, when we connect with our sadness, it tells us what do we care about in life? Who, what, where? If we think about an emotion like, what's the purpose of an emotion like frustration? Okay, if we deconstruct it into these three parts, frustration, my story is this is taking too long or this is too difficult, right? My impulse is to generally think about yourself at the grocery store in lines. What do? You look for the quickest line. You feel frustrated in this line, you look for a faster line to move to. So what frustration does is it has us look for possibilities that are faster or easier than the one we're currently pursuing. Yeah. So then if you think about the purpose of frustration, it's not really for you to yell at people. It's not really for you to feel bad. It's really to push you to look for other possibilities about how you're doing things to be more effective. So really frustration is a tremendous emotion connected with efficiency to get you to find a faster, easier way to do whatever it is you need to do.
Yes. As I understand it, I think this is a line. All motivations are motivating. They're all sort of internal carrots and sticks, right? Like, I don't want this, therefore it's motivating me to find a way out of this frustration. But also motivations are motivators, but also all emotions, as I see it, connect us to what we care about. Like, I'm only angry about things I care about. I'm only scared if something I care about is threatened. I only feel sad if something I care about has been lost or could be lost. So in a way, like, to be cut off from one's emotions is really to be cut off from kind of life itself, because it is the heart of what we care about.
I agree completely. Yeah. I think the difference with something like sadness is it tells you specifically what you care about. Yeah. So you can even do a test. You can say, what do I want my future life to be like? Well, you can think about losing all your money. Does it make you sad? No. Okay. Well, then, you don't care about it so much. If it makes you terribly sad, then okay, that's important to you. But I would agree is that they all have to do with, I think it's the color of life, the quality of life, our engagement with life. And actually, if you think about emotions, if you think about these 5 things, if you think about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, when we do it, and who we do it with, all of those are driven by different emotions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And not just good, positive emotions, right? When we do it, well, we could do it tomorrow. Why? Because I'm feeling a little complacent, or because I'm feeling really content or lazy, or I might do it right this second because I feel the emotion of urgency. So there are certain emotions that determine when we do things, but there are certain emotions that determine how we do them, right? Do we do it out of care and respect, or do we do it out of arrogance, or do we do it out of resentment? All those make a difference in how we do things. So one of the beauties of this is you can begin to look at this whole palette of emotions and you say, oh my gosh, look, all of these are what help me do this. These are what keep me out of trouble here. Here's what aligns me with myself. Here's what allows me to connect with other people. Here's what allows me to connect with nature or the universe. They're all about connection.
And again, if this sounds abstract to people, because I can get quite philosophical about this, this is really like a bottom line thing. Anyone who's a yoga teacher listening to this, your students come based on the emotions you help them generate in class. Whether someone picks me as a coach or not is going to be based on that. I wanted to do this interview because I thought of Dan Newby, I thought of reading the book, I thought of Curtis, and I went, oh yeah, I totally want to do that. I was like, sign me up, like get him on the show.
And what were the emotions that had you make the call?
Right. I was warmth. There was a little bit of enthusiasm for the work.
Okay, enthusiasm for the work.
With Curtis's recommendation, there was also something like a tiny bit of embarrassment. I hadn't spoken to you in ages. A little bit of nostalgia because it was 50 years ago we spoke. So there was a cocktail, but most of that cocktail was very positive. And, had Aggie said to me, look, the only time Dan can do the interview is 7 a.m., I would have still done it. Mm-hmm. Whereas some people, where I didn't have the same emotional response, I would have gone, nah. Yeah. There's a real behavioral consequence to that cocktail.
Yeah. Which I would say is connected with your enthusiasm or your curiosity or your intrigue with what's going to come out of this conversation. Yeah. The only thing,
values, right? It shows me learning is a value for me, and I was like, I'm going to learn something in this conversation.
Yeah. And the only thing I would say is that we need to be really careful about what we label positive and negative, because for instance, if I promise to send a document to somebody, okay, and I haven't sent it, well, I can have promised to send that document out of, I don't know, enthusiasm or out of care or out of something we might consider positive. But if I'm starting to feel like, oh my gosh, I better send that because otherwise I'm not keeping my word, right? And that's important to me. So I might feel guilt that I haven't sent it. Well, that's getting me to do the thing that I promised to do. So it's not a negative emotion in the sense that it gets us to do what we really care about doing. So that's the only thing I would say is the more we can set aside that judgment, because, okay, well, if there's a little embarrassment, that's just what it was. If there was nostalgia, that's just what it was. Yeah.
Dan, my life would be a lot better if I had a little bit more embarrassment, guilt, and shame. Let me tell you that. Most people would say they're negative emotions, but I've come to the conclusion that as someone who isn't easily embarrassed, as someone who doesn't often feel guilt and shame, I've come to the conclusion I need to nurture those emotions.
Yeah. And maybe that would make your life better. But this is when we have the palette, this is what we can decide. And for some people, I would say that they, actually I do some work in the area of safety and safety coaching. So petroleum, those kinds of things. And my partner is very, well, underneath, I think there's a lot of anxiety, looking for problems, looking for difficulties, et cetera. And one of the things that's interesting is he sees things in the safety situations that I don't see. Yeah, because I'm really relaxed about it, because I'm kind of naive, because, these are all emotions that don't allow me to see something that he sees, because he has that sense of a little bit of anxiety or fear or dread or something. So I think it's fascinating when you really get down to, okay, what's my emotional landscape? What do I look like emotionally? Where am I strong? Where am I not strong? What could I strengthen? What might improve my life if I cultivated X? But it's not always the same emotion. For somebody, it might be gratitude. And for somebody else, it's anger, because they don't have access to anger, because they have a judgment that it's dangerous or wrong.
And culture. So this is maybe where we're moving from emotions into dispositions, or sometimes Newfield had this wonderful distinction between an invisible long-term mood and a short-term, more visible feeling, because you can't feel the mood, feeling. And I found this such a useful distinction in that my wife would not say she was cautious. She would say she was normal and I was reckless. Right? Because
in this case, she's right, but she's probably right. I get the point. But
there's also a narrative, which is, a Ukrainian cultural narrative is life is dangerous. Don't trust strangers. Don't tell anyone about your money. Be careful about your money. Keep things close. There's a historical cultural conditioning there. But to her, it doesn't feel that way. It just feels
normal, it looks normal.
It feels normal to be me and be like, yeah, let's invest 50K in that. Let's see what happens with Bitcoin. Who cares? So there is an invisible layer here as well, right? Which is partly personality, partly cultural.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It looks normal to us because we're us. We just see the world the way we see the world. But this is why it's so useful to learn about this, because what we might realize is that, just like you said, for some people, this looks dangerous. For other people, it doesn't look dangerous. I'll tell you, bungee jumping looks to me like crazy. Crazy people do that. It looks really dangerous. Well, but that's my perspective on it, right? That's the observer I am. But also, we have different emotional makeups based on what we observed as a child, what sense we made of it, the culture we lived in, the family we lived in. And the thing is that all of those serve us, or they did serve us in some way at some time, but they may not today in the way they did before. So for your wife, right? Okay, this caution, well, we're not going to call it caution, her prudence, let's say, as an emotion. Well, maybe it served her really well growing up. And then she discovers a point in her life where she goes, oh, you know what? I'm kind of bored because I've been so prudent in life. I'd like a little more excitement. I'd like to take a few more risks. Okay, well, that's fine. That's just about cultivating different emotions. Yeah.
And as you say, because it affects perception and cognition, we can never be independent of that. This is where we need a coach sometimes, right? To have someone that, or we go traveling, or my wife was in Bali with me. She's like, the problem is these people think life is easy. Like it's just like the traveling exposed certain pattern, or and also it's different times of life. Like when we're in holiday in Bali, maybe that wasn't so useful for her, but in the middle of COVID, actually she was really well adapted to life is dangerous. She was like, why is everyone freaking out? Obviously life is dangerous. Yeah. She was really adapted for that. So as you say, it's about the time and the place as much as the whether it's right or wrong.
So the bottom line for me is the more we can know about ourselves, the more sense other people will make, and also the less judgmental, because we'll begin to see that, okay, I don't have a natural, easy, organic access to, let's say, excitement, me. Yeah. But other people I know do. Well, in that case, maybe I want to hang out with those people because they help me bring excitement into my life. And if that's what I want, then I can learn some of that from them, not by studying them, but by being around them. And vice versa, right? If somebody, I would bet a lot of money that your emotional makeup has shifted at least a little by being with somebody who's very prudent.
Sure. We actually have an impact on each other.
Absolutely.
If just sleep next to each other. There's a physiological impact, but it impacts both of our moods in a kind of slightly it's interesting. We learn emotions more through immersion and modeling than through logically, right? This is why I think traveling's so great, learning from different cultures. And there's a huge cultural piece here. Like as an American in Spain, I'm a Brit in Mexico right now. I actually had a joke argument with a Mexican lady yesterday. She was saying, the problem with your culture is you repress emotions. And I was saying the problem with your culture is you bloody don't, And we were both laughing because we both knew that it was a culturally biased perspective. But there was definitely a tension there as to sort of, how much emotion should be expressed based on the cultural difference. And like that is the cultural piece is huge here, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things to remember, though, is that the level of expression doesn't reflect the level of emotional understanding. And I'll give you an example. I lived in Italy for a while. And, Italians are very expressive with their emotions. But I worked in this area coaching Italians. And one of the things I discovered is that they're no more emotionally literate than anybody else. It's just that culturally, it's accepted. In fact, it's strange if you don't express your emotions. So one of the things I've learned is that, okay, somebody expresses their emotions, in a very loud, big way. Okay, that's fine. Somebody doesn't. So, let's go to Canada, right? Where they don't, or Minnesota, where I lived for many years. But it doesn't mean those people don't have emotions. They have all the same range of emotions. It's just that culturally they've learned a different set of what's appropriate and not, and they judge emotions differently, right? They have a different assessment or interpretation of emotions. But I think the one thing is to realize that every human being has a full range of emotions. Every human being can learn about them. And the level at which we express them doesn't reflect our knowledge of them, intelligence of them, our emotions.
I mean, I always use the example of where the best literature in the world comes from is Russia, England, and Japan, which are three kind of fairly emotionally repressed nations. But clearly there's emotional awareness, or we wouldn't have this huge body of music and poetry. And, like those cultures have all produced beautiful emotional literature. So it's not like people aren't aware, even if the average English or Japanese doesn't usually express.
No, but the one thing I would say is every culture I work in, and I worked in, with people now, particularly because through Zoom, but I have yet to run into a culture anywhere where people say, yep, I already learned this, right? I learned this interpretation of emotions. I learned to see emotions as a tool. I learned to deconstruct them. I learned to not judge them. I've never had anybody say that they already knew this. So for me, what I take from that is that we human beings the way in which we've moved as human beings has been very rational, which is fine. But the part we've left out, one of the parts is emotions. We just have not paid attention to it.
My listening is when a culture says we're emotionally expressive, I then ask which emotions. Because actually, I don't know of a culture that expresses all the emotions. Like in Brazil, you can express happiness, you can express anger much more than England, but you can't express sadness. It's taboo to be sad in Brazil. So it's actually, I don't know a culture that's emotionally expressive. I know cultures that are selectively emotionally expressive.
Sure, we all are. As human beings, as individuals, as cultures, we all are. And that's fine, but I think what we could benefit from is seeing the wider range, being familiar with them, knowing that they're available. Because, if you take an emotion like anguish or rage, let's say, well, most of us are not going to experience that emotion every day. But if you don't know what that is, if you don't understand what it is, if you don't know how it feels in your body, then it's not available to you as a tool, right? And then, actually it may be terrifying when you feel anguish in some moment because you didn't even know it existed as an emotion. So again, I think that there's a role to play here for the intellect, which is to understand emotions. But I think we fool ourselves if we think we can learn everything about emotions in our heads. For me, it's similar to, I want to be a great chef, so I go watch a bunch of television programs on cooking. That doesn't make me a great chef. That teaches me about cooking. But if I don't get in the kitchen and cook and make my mistakes and burn stuff, then I'll never be a great cook, right? Great cooking comes from practicing great cooking and including everything else I've learned about food.
Yeah, experiential learning here as well. Ways of knowing. I point listeners to John Vervaeke's episode on ways of knowing. He's really cut this up in a really nice way as a philosopher. I think it's for any embodiment person, it's super helpful because it's intuitive, but he's really gone there. Canadian guy. So what would you say are the skill sets if we were talking about this in terms of competencies? Obviously, this feeling the body, is it being able to name the emotions, is it being able to work cognitively? What are the competencies that we haven't learned in school?
Yep. Well, the very first one is stopping and noticing. I think this is the first one that people really don't see the value of, right? We're all about action. So simply stopping and noticing, and asking yourself, wow, how do I feel? What am I feeling in this moment? I think that's the first one. And that often for people is a stumbling block. That's the hardest thing because it's such a foreign idea to them or they don't see value in it. So the first one is we have to notice, what are we feeling? What are we thinking? What are we experiencing? The second one is to put a name on it. So to begin to name. And, there's studies that show that most of us who are, fairly well educated repeat the names of the same 15 or 20 emotions over and over and over. So we never broaden, or we're not very good at broadening our vocabulary. But, in the books that you're citing, there's, 200 emotions. So there's a tremendous range of emotions, but most of us just use the same words over and over. Yeah. So by beginning to name them, even though sometimes we can't pick the name that makes sense to us, we can't get clear, or if we say, well, it's something like, what it does is it forces us to expand our repertoire or our vocabulary. And this is exactly why Curtis and I wrote the field guide, because people call anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, aggravation, they call them all anger. Yeah. Instead of saying, well, no, it's not exactly anger. Actually, I'm feeling frustration, or I'm feeling annoyance, or I'm feeling irritation. Those are all different emotions in my world. And unless we can name them and we can say, here's the story, here's the impulse, here's the purpose, then we're not really clear on what that emotion is. So step one is noticing. Step two is naming. Step three is knowing all of this, right? It's just building your knowledge base of, the three parts, and also, what emotions do what emotions are related to each other or different. So there's a whole body of knowledge that you could grow over time. But the fourth, I think, is really where the rubber hits the road, which is navigating emotions. A lot of people say, they talk about controlling emotions. And my argument is, well, I never in my life controlled my emotions, and I don't know anybody else who has. So maybe we're thinking about our relationship with emotions not in the most productive way? What if we thought about it as navigating? Meaning, I notice, I realize I'm in the emotion of, let's say, resignation. Nothing I do is going to make any difference. What if that emotion is not serving me? Well, what emotion do I want to be in? I want to be in the emotion of, let's say, I want to be inspired. Well, how do I move from this emotion that I find myself in to that emotion? Well, that's navigating. How do we move from here to there when it would be valuable?
Yeah, let me jump in here. So I noticed you use the word navigating, which I really like as sort of a soft word with different directions rather than controlling, or even sometimes you'll hear about managing emotions. I sometimes talk about leading emotions. I find that quite a fairly nice word. There is this tension, isn't there, between do we stay with the emotion, maybe get the message, maybe have it influence us, the wisdom of the body, or, that taken to an extreme can just become a kind of acting out or a indulgence almost, just sitting in there forever. What is the dance between, I don't think there's one answer to this, between being with, hanging out with emotions, letting them transform naturally, letting them give us the message, and sometimes just saying, hey, no, I'm a grown up, I need to get on with my shit, or this really doesn't serve me right now in this situation. What's your sense of how to make those choices?
Yeah. Well, one way is what's the imperative in the moment, right? So if, let's say I was feeling really, feeling despair, and I'm having this conversation with you. Well, for me to show up here in despair is probably not going to give us the best interview. So, in that moment, I might say, no, you know what? Because I respect Mark, because I want to do this. And okay, I need to be in the emotion of X. So I might want to shift that emotion because it is going to serve the conversation I'm going to go into. But it doesn't mean that despair is necessarily going to disappear just because I set it aside for the moment. So I think what's really valuable is to have enough respect for our emotions to spend time with them and to be curious about them. What's that despair about? What's it trying to tell me? What's the purpose? Why did it show up now? All of these questions that I can ask myself. So I might go from here to, okay, I'm going to go, sit out on the terrace, and I'm just going to recall this despair and remember how I was feeling, and just be curious about it for 10 minutes to see what I discover. So I think that this is a thing in coaching. Just because somebody's uncomfortable in emotion doesn't mean we should help them move out of it. The first question is it serving you in some way to feel sadness? If it is, stay there, right? You're not going to be there forever because emotions do come and go. So, okay, you're in sadness, but something's going to happen and you're going to move to a different emotion. But if it's serving you, stay there for the moment, even if it's just for 1 minute, so you can listen to it. So that's one way, I would say, is one, we may choose to shift them because it's important in this moment for something we need to do, but I wouldn't be under the illusion that emotion is just going to disappear. We need to spend some time with it to understand it and, see what it's there to tell us.
Yes, answer the telephone, one of my teachers says, and it says, look, if you're going to put a pillow over the telephone, it won't stop it ringing. And sometimes you might want to do that right now or not. But as you say, is it time to answer the telephone or is it time to ignore the telephone, right? Sometimes it's like, okay, it's all that now, but I just got to be, sometimes for me, I just kind of go, there's something going on there. I don't know what it is, but I don't want to act out of that right now. Like I know I'm irritated. I'm not going to take it out on my secretary. Instead, I'm just going to sit with that later on and figure out what that is. And for now, I'm just going to regulate it because I've got something I need to do. Yeah. Like that is a sort of ignoring the telephone until I can answer it sometimes. But okay. In terms of anything else on sort of like how to navigate emotions, obviously working with the cognitive side of things, working with the physiological side of things. Like if I just not eaten, for example, my emotions change, sleep, basic stuff. I was like, don't make any big decisions from anger till I've eaten, basic stuff like that. Yeah. And then it's who I'm around. Like, am I hanging out with lots of angry people? I've noticed that I quit social media a month or two ago and my emotions have shifted slightly. I'm not having this input of agitation all the time, Yep. It's, anything else I'm kind of navigating emotions more skillfully.
Well, I often approach it from the story side because that articulation for me is the easiest way. But I think that, if you think about that ontological model, so we have emotions, what are the other two parts? Well, they're either what we're thinking, they're the language, or they're the body. I think if we want to shift emotions, if we have to involve both of those. So what I do is not very sophisticated when we come to the body, but what I often do is if you ask somebody, okay, if they're in resignation, okay, shape yourself in resignation. Let me see the body, right? And they all collapse and do what they do in resignation. Well, what's the emotion you want to be in? Joy. Okay, well, shape joy. And just by moving back and forth between those, they begin to feel the difference in the body. So I would say, you can work with emotions. You can bring the body into it as the somatic piece of it without being, I would say my depth in emotions is not that deep, but it's not that I need the distinctions. It's the coachee needs to feel what it feels like to be in resignation. They need to feel what it feels like to be in joy in every way, and then they'll be able to shift themselves. So if they can't change what's happening in their heads, they can change what's happening in their body, and they can invite that emotion. And there's many other ways. I mean, this is why we have meditation and yoga, and you can go run. There's a million ways you can change your body. So what I invite people to do is to experiment with it, but particularly to notice, because every emotion has a particular body that supports it. And if you change that body, the emotion cannot be sustained.
Yeah. And as you say, you can also bring the narrative to the surface, right? Like, okay, so you often feel anxiety and you have this deep underlying narrative that the world is a dangerous place. Yeah. Like, let's bring that to the surface and at least question that as a narrative so it isn't in the background running the show.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you say people like sort of lack understanding, or what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that you come across, some of the biggest misunderstandings? Like a classic one I hear is like, you caused my emotion, I'm the victim. Like what are some of the ones you come across that you just regularly need to educate people on?
Well, one of them we talked about, positive, negative emotions. That's one. Number two is just the idea that emotions are a domain of learning. That they're equal to intellectual learning. They're just different. Yeah, but they're not fighting with our intellect. We've set it up that way. It's your head or your heart. No, you can't think without emotions, right? And emotions involve thought. So they're deeply connected. So I think when we kill that story about these are separate things or fighting with each other, no, they're both there as tools for you as human beings. So I think just reframing what emotions are and their role for us as human beings. Another one you mentioned already, which I think is excellent, which is the one about other people cause my emotions. It's so easy to test. Okay, Mark, make me happy. There's nothing you can do that will make me happy. No, it's happiness is mine. Yeah. So the reason we call them our emotions is they're ours. So I think this piece is really important for people to take ownership and responsibility for their emotions.
How do you find this balance? Because I started off the sort of ignorant view of kind of like, I don't make anyone else happy or sad. No one else can make me happy or sad. And then that can lead to this other extreme of like, well, I'll just do what the fuck I want because other people's emotions are their business. I mean, I kicked him in the leg, but, him being unhappy has nothing to do with me. I mean, like, what is the balance there between being interested in, concerned with, accepting oneself as an influence on others' emotion?
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying that other people don't have an impact on my emotions. I'm just saying they don't cause them. So, for instance, when Lucy does something that's very thoughtful, when she brings me a cup of coffee, I'm like, wow, well, she didn't make me happy, but I feel really pleased that she brought it. So what happened? She decided to do it out of her emotion, which was whatever, care, service. She brought me the coffee, and then it produced a story in me, which is, oh, Lucy really cares about me. And so, you know what? I feel cared for. I feel content. I feel loved. I feel satisfied. So I think this is the way. It's not to say that we don't have impact, because we absolutely do, both direct and indirect. But I would say there's not an equal sign between, you don't cause mine. So for instance, this is why, okay, a lot of people are having to, rethink their jobs, rethink their work right now. Okay, so does that mean that the COVID situation, is causing your resentment? No, it's causing a certain set of circumstances your story and your view of that is producing certain emotions in you. But if you don't take ownership of them and you don't say, oh, okay, well, this emotion isn't serving me, I'm going to, go find another one to use, then you're letting it control you. But it doesn't have to. This is a skill, I think, that we can learn. But language betrays us. Every time I hear that, and every pop song since, 1955 has been about "You Make Me So Happy" or "So Blue." But it's a myth. It's not true that that's how emotions work.
Yeah. And I'm trying to find, it strikes to me that to have no equal sign would be like you're completely enlightened. There's a story of a Buddhist monk who gets his legs sawn off by bandits. They cut all his limbs off, and he's just wishing them well and having happy, being happy. Now that to me is like, okay, that's an extreme of enlightenment. And over here would be a child who's like completely distraught because they can't have the candy immediately, and they're screaming and shouting. And then in between, every human being has on a good day and a bad day as well, right? Like I can be more or less, I can deal with COVID and still be happy, whereas someone else, it's maybe like it's going to bum them out. So I see that almost like a scale of kind of how responsible I can realistically be. Yep. And in terms of how I treat others, it's something like I acknowledge that I'm a major impact on other people, and I want to be responsible for that. And I'm always guessing, right? Like I might bring you a cup of tea to make you happy, and you might be like, fuck you, I want coffee, and be really angry. Like I'm just always guessing in that sense.
Yeah, a lot of times, of course, we're doing it because of our emotions, because they're telling us that would be a good thing to do, but that's not necessarily how the other person's going to respond to it.
Yeah, I think I went a bit too far with that one. I got a bit liberated, and now I'm sort of coming back to being a bit more normal about it.
Yeah. I think the thing we can do, though, is we can commit ourselves to learning how to take responsibility for our emotions. Okay. Right. I'm not saying, sometimes Lucy, does something and I feel a certain emotion. And one of the things I remind myself in so many words is to say, hold on, Dan, this is your emotion. So just slow down, take a look at it, figure it out. She didn't cause you to feel this way. Like she didn't do it to you. It's like she did something. You feel this emotion. Now's the time to take a look at it and to figure it out. And what I always find is, oh no, I have a certain story. That story is grounded or ungrounded, is true or it's not true, and that's producing the emotion. And then I decide, okay, well, so I'm annoyed, but what emotion do I want to be in, right? I mean, okay, I got the sense of annoyance now. What emotion do I want to be in? And then I move there. So I think, again, this is the navigation part. It's that we begin to get really good at introspection and asking ourselves, okay, where did that emotion come from? And why is it showing up for me right now? Because it wouldn't have shown up for Mark in exactly the same situation. So why is it showing up for me? That's something about how I'm seeing the world.
Yeah, I often notice this becomes most in awareness when there's a difference. Like me and my wife respond very differently to an event. We go, oh, wow, we're really thinking about this differently. And there's a moment of like, you're wrong, I'm wrong, or, whatever. And then there's like, actually, oh, wow, that's interesting. Or there's a misunderstanding. Like, someone yesterday, I said, oh, could you please be on time for this meeting? And they got furiously angry, and they saw it as like me trying to control them. Whereas I saw it as just me saying like, hey, there's a cultural difference here. I'd love it if you were on Gringo time. Is that possible? And I was really confused for a moment. Like, why are they angry? Then I realized like, oh, they've got a whole different story here. And it turned out there was a whole history behind it. She had some controlling ex-boyfriend or something, So it's just like, oh, okay. But it only became obvious when it was different.
Yep.
Okay, what keeps you, Dan, we're moving towards closing here, which is kind of sad. It's like definitely gone for a lot longer. What keeps you in this? What kind of keeps you doing this work? Is it just that why this? I mean, you're a guy, you're doing a lot of stuff.
Well, I started it because it really helped me. It changed my life. I can't, we could talk for days about that, but really, I was emotionally ignorant, and it changed my life. And my life was horrible, dark, difficult, confusing. And now, I live in a lot of contentment and gratitude. So part of it is just what it did for me. And I really appreciate that. I want to share that with other people. So I'd say from a personal perspective, really, that's the reason I do this. And I think, the other thing is I find a lot of joy and purpose in it. When people light up and they go, oh my gosh, I never knew the difference between a mood and an emotion. And they suddenly see that there's value in that little tiny piece of learning. For me, I see that making their life better. And so for me,
Right.
I just find it, and there's a part of it, Mark, that's just a mystery. Why this? Why me? I don't know. This, this Caucasian guy from the Midwest in the U.S. Why did he get so enamored with emotion? I'll tell you one thing that happened when I published the very first book, The Unopened Gift, is a friend of mine in England wrote to me and she said, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but you are the last person I ever would have imagined would write a book on emotions. And she was completely right. There was nothing. It came out of my ignorance, and that's what fuels it. Is, there was no better reason to do it than if I'm this ignorant, there must be other people this ignorant in the world too.
And they're the best teachers. Like I teach ethical marketing, for example, because I used to be terrible at marketing, then I learned. I don't teach confidence because I've always been confident, right? Like I don't know how to teach confidence. I do know how to teach embodiment because I used to be super cognitive and I learned embodiment. So I think the people who have learned consciously and maybe who weren't the quickest at it originally are often the best teachers. So that does make total sense to me.
I agree with you. Yeah. Well, it's easy for me to see the value of it. I enjoy it. And it's been great, I feel.
And this is a pleasure. I think we'll have to get you back sometime. Maybe we'll do one with me, you and Curtis. We'll do an old school Newfield reunion. How did that could be fun, huh?
That would be fun.
Where do people find you? Where do people your book? I recommend, but you've got a website as well that's got a load of free resources and stuff on, right?
Yeah, it's schoolovemotions.world.
There we are.
Schoolovemotions.world, and there'll be a new site coming up next week, I think. So it's all in renovation. There's lots of blogs. There's videos. There's books. There's courses.
Name of the book one more time in case people want to kind of look.
There's two books. The Unopened Gift is one book. That's the primer. And the Field Guide to Emotions is the one I wrote with Curtis. It's the dictionary.
Yeah, man. That's if you're a coach or like an NVC trainer or a yoga teacher who wants to really geek out and go like deep into it, like I would really recommend that book. Like I've been studying this area for quite a while, and I was, for me it was a page turner. I was like, oh shit, that's the difference between anger and irritation. Like it really articulated some stuff that I kind of intuited. So good one. Dan, this has been so much fun, but I need to run. So I'm just going to put my number in the chat there. If you have WhatsApp or an iPhone, then give me a text because I want to ask you something privately. But I don't know if you're able to do that.
Okay, I will do that. Very good. It's been a delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed this, man. Take care.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Embodiment Podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment Podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator Course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you. Until next time, welcome home to the body.